Thank you all for joining us. I very much appreciate you taking the time to come speak with us. I know our readers are going to really appreciate hearing what you have to say. The way that we're going to do this is you all are unmuted. The readers are going to be muted. And I have some kind of basic questions about the big issues. I'll ask you those. And then as we go, the readers can use the chat function and send in questions, and then we'll filter through them and ask them to you all. Because we have 4 of you today, I would very much appreciate if we could keep answers kind of as short as possible. I don't want to like cut you off. I know some of this stuff is real complicated and you need more than 10 seconds to answer. But if you could just try to do like a minute or 2, this could move along and we won't be here for 2 hours. What I would like to do is I would like to start off, we'll just go around, and if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, not so much like your political platform, but just, like where are you from, where'd you go to school, that type of thing, and then we'll get into the questions. So we'll go with like the clock. We'll start with William. Could you tell us a little about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. My name is William R. Soland, and I am a father, a public defender, and a geek. I think all those are important to my campaign. I grew up in Phoenix. I went to public school there. I was in the Madison School District. I went to Simus and Meadows, and then I was in North High School for high school. After that, I went to U of A for a short period of time. I struggled there. I went to NAU. They took care of me. I got my bachelor's at NAU. I came back to U of A, got my law degree. Went back up to Flagstaff and worked as an attorney in a legal aid office up there for DNA People's Legal Services. It was a high stress, high turnover job. By the time I'd been there 5 years, I was considered the senior Arizona attorney. I was in charge of offices all across the state, both on state land and on tribal land. I was overseeing people who had 20 or 30 years more experience than I did, but they didn't happen to be attorneys. So I happened to be the one that had to wrangle everybody. It was very difficult, and during that time I got married. My wife decided to seek a graduate degree down here at the U of A. Then she decided to seek a second graduate degree down here at the U of A, and I moved to Tucson. And I started working for the Pasquayaqui tribe, first for their legal services, and then for their public defense. And after that, I moved to Pima County Public Defender's Office. I've been fighting for Arizonans who are at or near the poverty level, some of the most forgotten Arizonans, some of the ones most caught up in the system for my entire career. I've got 2 kids. The oldest is in the district. She goes to Sam Hughes. She's a first grader. And, I'm a lifelong learner, and that's what being a geek means to me. It means getting excited about learning new things. So that's me in a nutshell.
All right, thank you. Rebecca, would you like to go next?
Sure. My name is Rebecca Zapien. I'm a graduate of Tucson High, so a dedicated lifelong TUSD fan. My kids, I'm also a parent I have 2 kids who have been in TUSD. By training, I'm a preschool teacher. I started working in schools when I was 16 years old. I'm a 3rd generation teacher. I currently work at the U of A with people who want to get early childhood certification. So that's people who work birth through age 8. I place student teachers across 2 years of their experience, both in preschool for a year and then in kinder through 3rd grade. So I partner with all the major school districts in Tucson, and with TUSD being the largest, that's where the bulk of my students are. So I work collaboratively across about 26 schools a year. I came into TUSD as an English language learner. It's been a really great experience, both as a parent and as a student. I work in collaboration with a lot of people who work in parallel with schools. So that's places like Make Way for Books, the John Valenzuela Youth Center, all sorts of community-based organizations and families, because our program is a community-based model. So I'm not often on campus. I work primarily out in schools with families and teachers.
Okay, thank you. Luis, how about you?
Thank you. I first want to thank the Star for putting this forum together.
Mhm.
I think it's extremely important that the general public out there hears from the candidates. I grew up in the old Pasquayaki Indian village off of Grant Road and 15th Avenue, uh, affiliated by race with Pasquayaki, as you can tell by my ojo de venado. I'm a product of the Tucson Unified School District. I'm going to age myself here by telling you that two of the schools, my elementary school, Ritchie Elementary, and John Springs Junior High, are now closed. So, but I graduated from Tucson High, and I'm a proud Badger. Once a Badger, always a Badger. As you know, I served in the United States Air Force during the Vietnam conflict. I served 4 years in the Air Force and 2 years in the Army. Served in the Arizona State Senate for 4 terms. Sat on the Education Committee all of that time, so I'm very familiar with the process of how schools are funded. A lot of the laws that have been legislated over time. I was one of the individuals involved in the recodification of Title 15 back in the 1980s. Hasn't been codified since then, which tells you something about how important education might be to the legislative folks these days. I served also on the Pima College Board of Governors for 1 term. Actually, I filled out the term from a board member that had left. I served the last 2 years, 2016 to 2018. So I'm familiar with the process of the pipeline that we try to build between the public schools and the college to recruit students into the community college system. So I've been around for a while. I've been involved in the Tucson community for 40, 50 years. And so my passion has always been education, hence the motivation for my getting involved in this particular campaign. You know, I have grandkids in the public school system, nieces and nephews who have graduated and are currently attending the public school system. So I have a vested interest in how students do and to student success in a public system. So that's about the short and the end of it.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, so I would like to start out with some stuff that I hear about in the letters to the editor. I'm the opinion editor, so I see this stuff. One of the things that comes up quite a bit, and I'll rotate the questions. I'll start with Rebecca for this one. Teacher retention. What if you're elected, what do you plan to do about the fact that we're apparently running out of teachers?
This is a really great question because I do this all the time. So as a person who is a teacher and a person who works to help support incoming teachers into the profession, I get to see all the data. And, you know, my concern is that we constantly talk about how, you know, the universities get critiqued for not producing enough. And so they look for different ways to try and up those numbers. But what we know is that historically over the last 10 years, we're producing about the same number of people that we have been for some time. And so in teacher retention, I think the part that always is the elephant in the room is the fact that the public school system is constantly under attack. The profession is severely underpaid. There's no incentives to stay. And it's become a rippled effect that we're seeing across the district in every aspect that comes into contact with kids. So school bus drivers, food service, nurses, librarians, nobody wants to stay. And I mean, not nobody, but lots of people don't want to stay because they don't have options to basically meet their needs as like find like a way to have a paycheck. So I think we need to look at just all the issues on the table and really start to strategically work it from both ends. So like, I can continue to graduate people, but if people don't want to stay, then what am I doing? I'm basically, it's going into a black void. And what I would like to do is to have models of like incentivizing people who are already working in the district, who are non-degreed, non-certified. So the district to partner with them, which is a model that we have in other local school districts, but also nationwide. So if we really want to talk about showing up for our community and investing in people who want to work with kids and want to work in our districts, then there needs to be a bigger investment and support to get them to do those things. So I work with tons of teaching assistants who have been doing this for 16 years. They're perfect candidates for people who want to like get a degree. So the district could partner with something like the University of Arizona to figure out how to do this in parallel with helping to meet the needs of the numbers of vacancies. The other thing is obviously teacher pay, and it's not just teacher, it's like pay across the board. Every school district meeting that I've gone to, governing board meeting that I've gone to, there's always a group of people who are there to talk about their roles, their pay, and a plea for support and resources for them to do the work that they want to do and stay. So I think in addition to the like model of grow your own, I'd like to be able to look at other aspects of where the district is spending our money. And I know it's not enough. I know we're severely underfunded, and I know we have been for a long time. But the money we do have could be better spent in incentivizing the people who are doing the work. So like things like outsourcing, looking at those things and redirecting it to increase pay in all the positions, including substitute teachers, which is another, there's people who do substitute teaching as their career. Like, why aren't we looking at that? Why aren't we including them in being a part of like what we're doing in the district and allowing them to participate in things like professional development, and it serves the students of the district. So I have a lot of ideas around, and it's going to take time. I have a lot of ideas about teacher shortages, and it's going to take time, and it has to come from various angles.
Okay, thank you. Luis, how about you?
Yeah, I think first, I think we need to identify the fact that there are a lot of teachers out there. They're just not working with us or have left us. 2021 school year, over 200 teachers exited out of TUSD. I think it was a total of 207. It tells us something. Last year, 2022, we looked at about 70 to 80 teachers that we were aware of. Some of them retired, but the vast majority of them just basically left. They quit. So he's telling us something. Now, what are we doing in regards to this issue that is front and center of shortages of teachers in the classroom? And in terms of recruitment and retention, I think what we need to do is to grow our own. It's something similar to what Rebecca just mentioned. If we're not focusing in on how we can train our own teachers, get them certified through a process, then we're missing the boat here. I'm not blaming TUSD administration, but I think what we need to do is to think a little bit out of the box. For example, we have in the school districts, in the classrooms, we have teacher assistants. Some of those teacher assistants already have some college. They might have 30 units, they might have more. And we need to make sure that we bring them into the fold through a program that collaborates between the University of Arizona, the school district itself, and other four-year institutions. To grow our own is going to take a while. Because if you put together, for example, a 2-year program for some of these teacher assistants who already are in the classroom, we're going to save a lot of money. And the reason you're going to save money is because they can even do their student teaching while they're working. They don't have to quit their job. They can continue working. They can do their student teaching while they're working. Some of them are mothers. Their children are going to be close to them. All those kinds of things that we really need to look at and begin to figure out how we can start building a pipeline of new teachers to come into the system by making sure that we grow our own, and then have a component in there that they need to stay with the district a certain part of time after they become certified, because we'll be paying for their training. I know that other states are doing this, and so I'm wondering why we couldn't collaborate with other states as well and borrow from them to see how they're doing their programs. They've been doing it for a while. And I think Rebecca mentioned that it's done nationally. So why can't we borrow and collaborate with others to find out what is working, what isn't? And we go from there. Finally, I think we need to value our teachers more. And everybody will tell you the same thing. You know, a living wage is essential. Other professionals make a heck of a lot more than a teacher does, or starting salaries for teachers. And not only teachers, how about counselors? How about school nurses? You know, TUSD, a few years back, when they did their budget, they reduced the pay for counselors. What's the difference? And then they did away with a whole bunch of librarians. No wonder we have so many peaks and valleys in the levels of progression of academics in our schools.
Mhm.
If you look at those numbers, it's devastating to our kids. So I just think we need to start looking at what we're doing internally. I mean, I get on that board, one of the things I'm going to advocate is that we begin to take a step backward and start evaluating ourselves from within. What is it that we're doing right? What are we doing wrong? Where have we been? Where are we now? Where are we going? And that's something that really needs to be done.
Okay, thank you. All right, William?
Yes, thank you. I'll try to be brief because I think that a lot of what I would have to say has kind of been said. You know, obviously growing our own is an important thing, and it sounds like from Rebecca's standpoint, we're producing plenty of teachers here in Tucson. The question is, how do we keep them? So I'm not going to belabor the point, but I think that everyone here is in agreement that we need to make sure that we have things in place to keep teachers in their jobs. I've worked a lot of high passion, high burnout jobs, and I feel like public education is similar to that. I've got a lot of friends who are public educators, who are teachers. The problem is never a lack of passion. The problem is never a lack of caring or a desire to work with students. The problem is that when you pour your emotions into a job as much as a public defender or a public school teacher does, day in and day out, and you don't feel like the job is giving back to you, something has to give. And if we can't offer a good salary here, if we can't offer good benefits here, if we can't make our teachers feel supported, that's a problem. And so part of that is going to be us as board members going up to the legislature and demand that they actually fully fund our public schools. But part of that is going to be making sure that we as the board are listening to the teachers unions and addressing their concerns and making sure that the teachers feel like somebody actually cares that they stick around.
Thank you. All right, so moving, rotating a little bit more, we'll start with Luis here, and then we'll do William and then Rebecca, like that. So one of the things that I hear about in letters to the editor is the vouchers, the expansion of the empowerment, the ESAs, right? So I want to get your take on, do you think that's a good idea? And if you were elected to the TUSD board, how would you deal with that? The idea that, you know, some students might be leaving the district to go to private schools.
Well, look, this issue of declining enrollment has been around since pre-pandemic days. So we can't blame the pandemic as a whole, as I've heard some people blaming the pandemic being the only reason. I think one of the problems we have at TUSD is over the years, we haven't projected a very good image out there. You know, board members fighting all the time, people not following rules, favoritism, things of that nature. It's been all over the news. It's not new. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is that when you look into a mirror, that mirror will reflect what you put into it. And even if it's distorted, it's going to reflect the distorted image, because some of that is distorted. But let me put it this way. If I'm a parent and I'm looking at all this, I'm not going to have a whole lot of confidence in sending my child to a school. If I'm a parent and I don't have that confidence and I can't trust the school district to take care of my child and for my child to be safe, I'm going to send him somewhere else. And so we have to address that from the beginning. We need to change our image. Number one, we need to have a school board that works together. We need to have people working together and be transparent on the things that we do and the decisions that we make. That means bringing every stakeholder to the table, talking openly, finding out what our problems are, and moving to fix them. I am convinced that that's one of the problems. And because we have that, then we have this whole idea of all of our children not learning. You know, the parent wants to know why little Johnny or little Susie can't read, or why they can't write, or why they can't do math. We're talking about the peaks and valleys of academic progression in the schools. We can't continue to have schools that are 3 grade levels behind. And that's what's happening. And we need to know why. So if I'm a parent, I'm going to look for the best place that I can put my child in. Now, I don't believe in funding private schools. I think they hurt the public schools. I'm not advocating for that. But I'll tell you, whether we like it or not, charter schools are part of the education system. And I know organizations such as TEA don't like to hear that, but they are. I served in the legislature for 8 years, in the education committee for 8 years. We dealt with charter schools and charter school funding and private funding and home teaching. But I'll tell you, the percentages of students that are not in the public schools is a mere 1% statewide. So we got to think about this. How are we going to make sure that a parent feels comfortable sending their children to our school district, to our schools? There's a lot of things we can do. And we ought to start by making sure that the teachers in their classroom are being paid a livable wage, that they have the benefits that they need, and they will hire the best and the brightest in our classrooms. And that's a focus. It ought to be a focus. And I can go on and other things, but you know, I think that's enough for now.
I appreciate it. Thank you. All right, William?
Yes, thank you. I want to just upfront very directly address the question about vouchers. I am a public school proud candidate. I'm certified by Save Our Schools Arizona, and I'm against the current voucher expansion that's going on right now. At the moment, there is a drive to get a referendum on the ballot in November to refer this back to the voters so the voters can have the final say and undo the damage that the state legislature and Governor Ducey are trying to do to our public schools. Because I do think that this ESA expansion, voucher expansion, whatever you want to call it, is a scam to funnel money away from public schools and into private schools. The Department of Education recently released numbers showing that the vast majority of people who are applying for these new vouchers are not people who were previously in public schools and felt unsafe in a public school and wanted to move their kid out. These are mostly kids who are already in private schools getting a handout to go to a private school. I think if you want to send your kid to private school, that's fine. But I think that we need to have a strong foundation in public schools in Arizona. And that starts by the voters taking it to the legislature and telling them that they've already said no to voucher expansion once. We're going to say no again. And once I am on the board, if I am elected, I am going to fight with the legislature. I'm going to take it to Phoenix to argue for full funding for our public schools, to make sure our teachers are paid the full amount, our bus drivers are paid the full amount. Everybody gets to have food when they go to school. Everybody feels safe inside their school.
Okay, Rebecca?
Yeah, I don't believe in the voucher expansion. I don't believe in vouchers at all. I think, one of the issues of that we're constantly facing is just different ways that public systems, and in this case, our schools, are being constantly underfunded, constantly and purposely under-resourced. And this expansion, and again, it's an expansion, it's already in place. So this is yet more money that's taken out, is just entirely detrimental to our system. And it makes perfect sense that there's no way to get caught up. It's like the teacher shortage. If you're just addressing one end, you're not able to ever get to a place that's healthy and functioning. So all of these other things are factors. And also, like, we're never going to be able to address anything if we don't have a public school system that is supported, funded, and protected. And unfortunately, in Arizona, this is a constant thing. Public schooling is always under attack, whether it's its curriculum, its funding, the voucher system, comprehensive sex ed, all of the things. So to be 100% clear, I do not believe in the expansion. I met most of my closest current teacher friends through the first organization against the voucher expansion. And it's been one of these things that everybody's exhausted, and we have to keep fighting it because it's so detrimental in so many different ways.
Thank you. All right, we'll start with William on this one. This is the worst part of it. So this is school shootings, right? So, Uvalde, Texas is still fresh in our minds. If you're elected to the board, is there anything that you can do, or what would you like to do so that parents know their kids are going to be safe when they go to school?
Yeah, this is another one of those, like Rebecca was just saying, it needs to be attacked from multiple angles. And I do think that something needs to be done about the ability of people to get their hands on weapons that can take so many lives so quickly. But that's not something I can do at the school board level. What I can do at the school board level is try to make the students who are in our schools more safe. And in a long-term view, hard security is not what's going to do that. In a long-term view, what we need is more counselors, more social workers in our school. Pay them decent wages, make sure that there are enough in our schools around the district to work with kids and to see problems before they start. We need to work on our children's, not just their IQ, but their EQ. We need to make sure that they feel emotionally grounded and emotionally safe, because a kid doesn't just decide to pick up a handgun and shoot up a school in a day or a moment. These things are boiling beneath the surface for a while. And one thing that's become clear with Uvalde and Parkland is that having an armed police force on campus or paid by the district is not necessarily going to be a deterrent for some of these things. We've seen situations where it appears that the shooters view it as a bonus. You know, these are kids who feel like they've been wronged in some way, and they want to see themselves as the underdog. And so having an opponent when they go in there, that just increases their bloodlust, I guess. But what we see is that these armed guards don't stop school shootings. What's going to stop school shootings is making kids feel like they're supported at school, making kids feel like people are listening to them. And that starts from the ground up with our teachers and with counselors and with social workers.
All right, Rebecca?
Thanks.
Mhm.
I do think that this is one of those issues, and I'll probably repeat many of the things that Will just said, but I do think that this is one of those issues that is made further complicated by being put on the responsibility of school districts to address. And that is a really big concern, because it's not like it's a thing that they are creating and sort of facilitating and happening. However, the response and responsibility of what to do about it is put on the schools. And when you have schools that are under-resourced in all the ways, what are they to do about all of these things? So we're put in a place where we become reactionary, and we put policy in place that's actually making the schools and the students less safe. I'm with Will. I don't agree that arming guards and teachers and staff to be the accountable and responsible people for something to possibly happen in a school is the way to go. I do think that resourcing schools across the board with more people that are able to engage with students in holistic ways is really smart, like counselors, like therapists, is a really great avenue, as long as they're not in place of police. So their roles are really to meet kids and youth where they're at as far as who they are, not in reporting and investing in ways that are punitive. I do think that it's a great point to talk about how boards don't necessarily have the like responsibility for addressing this, but also advocating for their schools for the state to bring resources in. And obviously those resources are not police.
Right, Luis?
Well, you know, the whole idea of access to weapons is a whole different complicated conversation. We're dealing with safety in schools. That's our number one priority that ought to be front and center with school boards. The idea that we don't have a responsibility, you know, to me, just doesn't jive very well. We have the responsibility, but we also have to learn that we have a shared responsibility with the community, law enforcement folks, and others. And yeah, we need to provide all of those resources that my other two colleagues here have talked about. I couldn't agree more with them. I think those are things that we need to do, no question about that. But we do have a responsibility as board members to make sure that it happens. And how do we do that? I think one of the things we really need to do is have that dialogue with all of the stakeholders and make sure we come up with ideas that we can put in place to ensure that our children are safe. As a parent, any one of you that's a parent has children in school, you want to make sure they're safe. You're going to send them to a school to spend 6, 7, 8 hours on the school grounds. You want to make sure they're safe. And so it's a very high priority. So this idea that we don't have that responsibility is bogus to me. You know, I'm not trying to take a shot at Miss Rebecca there, but the idea that we don't have responsibility just doesn't jive. Look, there are things that we can do. The board makes policy and the administration follows it. And we evaluate administrators based on how they perform on their goals and objectives in the contracts. And if we can't get them to come up to make sure that our children are safe in collaboration with other institutions and entities that are available to us, then we have ourselves to blame. And so I'm prepared to make sure the school resource officers that are at the schools, that we have enough of them there. And that's the only exception in my mind for weapons to be on property. I don't believe that teachers should have weapons. That's not what they were hired for. That's not what they've been trained for. But if we have trained individuals in that event, God forbid, that some tragedy happens or is about to happen, that they're the ones that are trained to look at the minefields and that we don't step on them. And that's where I'm at. You know, I'm totally opposed to weapons in schools. There's no question about it. But there are exceptions. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so Rebecca, we'll start with you on this one. So kind of unfortunately, across the country, and it's happened a couple times locally, the school boards have become kind of like a center of controversy with regard to critical race theory and LGBTQ in books. And so, you know, parents are going to show up and they're going to complain about this. How would you deal with those complaints?
Well, I think everybody gets to get heard. So I think part of the, you know, the best part of and most informative part as a person who listens to the TUSD board meetings is often the call to audience where a lot of these things get brought up. I do think that it is my responsibility, or it would be my responsibility as a board member to make sure that things like curriculum that gets chosen, books that get chosen, comprehensive sex ed is reflective of the populations that we serve. And that means Black, Indigenous, Latinx, queer, trans people who are in our schools and our teachers and our community and their families. And everybody's family is different. And I think sometimes the response of pushing back against it is actually really harmful because it erases people from our community. So I do think that this is one of those things where people are able to make different choices for their kids, but the responsibility of our schools is to make sure that we have curriculum and programming that reflects everybody who is a part of the school. I'm happy to listen. I'm happy to also provide information about how we might be able to do programs that people can opt out of. And also with that, sometimes I wonder what the responsibility of allowing kids to be and youth to be able to make those decisions for themselves. You know, something is very different for somebody who's 5 versus 14. However, if we're going to talk about autonomy and the right to know self, like we need to be able to do that according to what's age appropriate. I do think that the responsibility of the board is to uphold making sure that everybody is seen and held in their schools. And that means talking about it.
Okay. All right, Luis.
Well, look, I think that there's a whole lot of people out there who don't know what critical race theory actually means. So there's a lot of misconception out there as to what it is. And then you have these folks out there ranting and raving that the schools are teaching critical race theory, i.e. hatred. Look, I don't know of any school, certainly in TUSD, that is teaching hatred. I've looked around and tried to find, I have no idea that there is any one school that is teaching that. When we're talking about culture and history of those folks whom we serve, I think that's more than appropriate. And we need to do that. You know, I'm in sync with Rebecca on this. We need to do that. Culturally relevant teaching in our classrooms, including language, is more than appropriate. We need to do it. We need to continue it. But we need to make sure that inappropriate, age-appropriate type of material is not being taught to the younger children that are in kindergarten, first grade, for example. You know, parents know what they can teach their children, what they can't. Sex education, for example, they talk a lot about that. I mean, hey, we've got children having children, 12 years old, 13. We need to address that in the schools appropriately. And that's all I have to say about that. You know, I want to emphasize, I don't know of any school in TUSD that teaches hatred.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, William?
Thank you. Yeah, I think this is one of those issues where we're all pretty well in sync here. You know, it's important, as Rebecca said, to listen to everybody and to make sure that everyone's needs are heard. And as members of the school board, our role would be to make sure that that is heard, but also that our students are getting a full education and a supportive education. There are certain things that are age inappropriate, but you can start teaching kindergartners about consent, you know, about bodily autonomy from day one. You can start teaching kindergartners about racial and gender issues from day one just by showing illustrations and books of things that exist in our community. I think there's a certain segment of the population that wants to believe that a normal family looks like Leave It to Beaver, and that's just not the case. And, you know, if we can show families that look like, you know, I have some dear friends that I met in birth group, 2 women who are raising a family together, and kids need to see those in their books and in their, you know, whatever they see on TV. I know that my daughter does get to watch some TV in first grade. I'm not entirely sure when that became popular, but, you know, they need to see representation of different kinds of families. They need to see representation of different kinds of people, not just all, you know, white-skinned people like a lot of the books that I grew up with had. And, you know, these sorts of things can carry up and become age appropriate, you know, the further you're in. I think the real important thing about CRT is that our kids need to know real history, and that's going to have to involve race placed in its proper context. You cannot teach Martin Luther King Jr. without race in its proper context. You cannot teach the westward expansion of the United States of America without race in its proper context. You can't teach the Civil War without race in its proper context. And that is something that we're going to have to draw a firm line on.
Okay. All right, so I think Luis is going to start this one. I think Luis goes first here. So I've been asking you questions that, you know, I kind of glean from, you know, what I hear from star readers. But that's kind of like from the outside. And so I don't want to deprive you all from speaking to the, you know, from the inside. Luis, is there, in terms of like the academics, is there, you know, in terms of teaching children, something that you are just like, this is the #1 thing that we have to take care of?
Yeah, that's an interesting question that you pose. Because I think that one of the issues relevant here in terms of academics has to do with a direct tie of discipline. If you look at it, if you look at some of the studies and surveys that have been done, uh, and you ask teachers about disruption in the schools, in the classroom, uh, teachers have a whole different idea than the students do. If you ask the students, you'll see the numbers just go sky high in terms of the question, is there disruption in the classroom? Most of them will say yes. Is there bullying in the classroom? Most of them will say yes, students do. But teachers don't. Those numbers are a lot lower. So what is happening here? I think what's happening is that students know when the teacher is watching. The students know when they're being watched and when they're not. And so they have a better idea as to whether this is going on or not. And that, believe it or not, has an impact on learning. That's one. We have to kind of find a way to make sure that when we do know of disruption and suspensions and all this other disciplinary measures that are taken in the schools, that all of the schools make sure that they mete out the punishment fairly and that it's all uniform. I get a lot of complaints about this, and it's not uniform throughout the schools. We cannot have board members getting involved to micromanage discipline because that sends the wrong message, not only to the students, but to the parents. That has a lot to do with how we're doing in the classroom. Secondly, in regards to making sure that our kids are learning, we need to make sure they have the right resources. Look, if you look at the budget for TUSD, you know how much they have budgeted for supplies for teachers in the classroom? $25. $25 doesn't go a long way. And this is why you're finding that teachers have to dig into their own pockets to get the necessary resources that they need in supplies. It's atrocious. We need to start paying attention to some of these things. As a member of the school board, you can bet I will. You know, if you have a chemistry class, you think the $25 is going to cover the supplies that that kid will need in the classroom? My gosh, you know, who's doing all these things? Look at another budget item. Curriculum. In the TUSD budgets, curriculum is part of the classroom expenditure per pupil. That shouldn't be in there. That should be an administrative function. These are not the guys that are in the classroom teaching. Some of these guys that have curriculum specialists have never taught a class in their life. So we've got to start thinking about where we're going to put our money to make sure that we're able to have the tools available for teachers to be able to do their job efficiently.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right, William.
Yes, thank you. The question, if I remember correctly, is what our number one concern is with schools. And I think for me, that would be the school to prison pipeline. And for anyone who's listening who isn't familiar with the concept, one of the things that I see as a public defender is that children at a certain age, you know, if they're not being supported at home, if they're not finding the support they need at school, they'll begin to act out. And right now, the model of dealing with that, you know, there's what they call zero tolerance for certain offenses, and you'll see things escalate fairly quickly. You know, for some of these are pretty minor offenses, you know, kids being kids, and you see it escalating to a suspension or an expulsion. And then when we have someone like an SRO or an SSO on campus, it can turn into a criminal situation pretty quickly. And then kids end up in juvenile court. And then they finish being a kid and they turn 18, and all they've ever known is a system that's treated them like a criminal. They spent most of their times getting in and out of schools, in and out of different juvenile care facilities. And now what do they know? What are their social skills? Well, the people they know how to interact with are other kids who are having problems, other kids who are caught up in the system. So all they know is that. And they end up then as my clients at the Pima County Public Defender's Office. And I can look back when I'm doing my sentencing memorandums, I can look back and I see that if someone could have taken a little bit of time with this kid around middle school or high school, you know, maybe this kid didn't need to end up in the system. Maybe they didn't need to end up in juvie. Maybe they didn't need to end up as now a felon, and that's going to haunt them for the rest of their lives. So what we need to do is disrupt this process, and one of the ways that we can do that is by adopting what's called a restorative justice model, or restorative discipline model in the case of schools. And that is a system where instead of having a kind of a top-down, one-size-fits-all solution for every kid, you get people who are involved in whatever incident is being dealt with, everyone getting together and make a decision about how to move forward. And that includes the child who's been acting out. And when you involve someone in their own discipline, all of a sudden they're being heard. The system isn't entirely against them. They don't learn that authority is always wrong, that authority is always there to press down on them. They don't get into a situation where they always see the world as them versus everybody else, them versus the system, versus the school, versus the judge, or whatever. And we need to have these more restorative forms of discipline in our schools. We need to have more social workers. We need to have more counselors to deal with problems before they occur. And so that, to me, as a public defender who does want my child to grow up in a safe environment, has been very dear to my heart. That would be my number one platform plank.
Okay, Rebecca?
It's hard to pick one, to be honest. And Will's is definitely a similar platform for me. I do think that that is something that would be really helpful for schools for a lot of reasons. And I think a big part of it is like the framework that is being created. So when I think about academics in the like micro, so we talked about policy from the outside, so this is like what we're doing. I think that one of the biggest things is standardized testing, which is a big part of, you know, how schools have become places that aren't really serving and meeting our needs as a community, and feed into things like the school to prison pipeline. And it feeds into budget line items that are depleting our schools because those are really expensive, and they're giving us things like scripted curriculum. So all of these things are intertwined. I do think that things like standardized testing also speak to how teachers have become less supported as to who they are as professionals. And that is a big part of this, because they're not focused or not given the space to focus on meeting kids, engaging them in meaningful learning experiences, looking at curriculum that is reflective as to who they are and their interests. So there's, again, like all these pieces where they're all interconnected, but when we're looking at the people who are the number one provider of, you know, instruction, and they're teaching to the test, they're under incredible pressure, mandates, underpaid, and at the end of the day, they're not even being given the space to do the job that they wanted to do and went to school for and know how to do and hold the relationships with kids. And we're setting everybody up to fail. It feeds kids into the school to prison pipeline. It feeds kids to want to maybe act out in ways that seek attention, that disrupt classes. It's all of those things. So I think really looking at how do we support people, and that includes teaching assistants, librarians, everybody who's participating in instruction, to be the professionals that they are, that this would look really different for everybody.
Okay. All right. So, that was a bit of a, final statement, but I do want to, we've been doing this for almost an hour. So I would just like to give you guys all like a minute or two. If there's anything, you want to speak directly to the voter, anything that we're missing, and then we'll wrap up, and we'll start with you, William.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be here. As Rebecca was just saying, it's hard to pick one issue. And I just went on at length about the school to prison pipeline. If you go to my website, solandfortusd.com, I've got 3 main issues on the main page. And right now I only have a lot of detail on the school to prison pipeline issue, dismantling that. But another big thing for me is protecting our most vulnerable students, our LGBTQIA+ students, our BIPOC students, because I think they're at particular risk right now. It's weird that national politics is so relevant on a local level, but with the overturning of Roe v. Wade through the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision, I know a lot of people who are very frightened that anyone who could get pregnant could very soon be criminalized. The current state attorney general is trying to resurrect this law from before statehood that criminalizes anyone who assists in an abortion. And I don't want there to be a situation where a 14-year-old child comes to school one week obviously pregnant, and the next week obviously not pregnant, and then gets reported to the police and ends up behind bars or in juvie because they had to have an abortion for some reason. This is an issue that's very dear to my heart. My family, we have 2 wonderful kids, but we did have to terminate a pregnancy in between. It was a heart-wrenching decision that we had to make. We wanted to have the child, and we ended up, finding out details about the child's internal organs that the kid was never gonna live. And so we had to terminate a pregnancy, and that should not be criminalized. There are a lot of people out there with a lot of stories. And so one thing that I would do if I were elected to the board is I would, there's currently a policy in TUSD that TUSD teachers and staff will not report to law enforcement if they believe that a child might not be in the United States legally, if there's an immigration issue. I think we should have the same thing with reproductive health. And I think it should cover not just the students, but the teachers and the staff and the administrators as well. So that's number 2 for me. And then number 3 for me is just supporting public education in general, which I think we've all talked about a lot. We need to make sure that the legislature is getting us the money to fully fund our schools, and we need to make sure that the money that we do get is being used in a proper way, that it gets to the classroom, that it gets to the students where it needs to be. So thank you very much again for allowing me to speak here today.
Okay, all right, we'll do it, Rebecca.
Thanks so much for having us. It's always really great to hear what other people have to say and questions. It certainly helps me think. This has been my life's work, schooling. So it's great to always have insight, and also to be given the space to continue to do this work in different ways. I've been asked to run for school board in the past, and I haven't. My kids were younger. I was in a different place. And honestly, I just really would like to have the opportunity to engage in policy work for and with TUSD in a different way, because I deeply care about the community that I already serve and I'm a part of. I would like TUSD to be a place that families turn to, where their kids feel seen, where families feel like their needs are being met. And I think we do a lot of really great things, and we don't often get to celebrate it because we're under attack or critiqued or fighting amongst each other. And I know that that's sort of the theme across public school right now, both locally and nationally. And I'd like to continue to be able to look at the ways to do things like expand the things that are going well within TUSD. Like we have these really beautiful bilingual programs that we're not expanding. Why are we doing that when our population deeply cares about it? It's very successful. It meets everybody's needs, whether you are a Spanish speaking household or not. So I'd like to be able to figure out how to engage in TUSD celebrating themselves for the things they do well, like championing, keeping customs border agents out of our schools, protecting our community, supporting our teachers and everybody who comes in contact with kids, and really potentially fighting against the state that doesn't have any interest in supporting our districts and our communities. You know, I cannot tell you how many signatures I've collected across so many years. It's really tiring, it's really exhausting, and it will continue. And I'd like to come to the table in a different role so that I can advocate and work with TUSD to do better.
Okay, thank you. All right, and Luis?
Well, thank you very much, Kurt. There are a couple of items that we didn't cover, which I'm interested in. I'll touch on them briefly. One is desegregation. As we know, we've been in for 40-some years. And just recently, the court order is to take the court out from under the monitoring system of that particular lawsuit. But it hasn't stopped there. It doesn't stop there at all. What the court basically did was gave the board the responsibility to monitor for at least 3 years. I think it's a very short fuse in 3 years to try to get to where the plaintiffs want to be. And so I'm prepared, once elected, to propose a monitoring system that will monitor the post-unitary status plan to make sure that we keep up with the mandates that are there, the recommendations and suggestions that are there, and that do it in an unbiased manner. The funding will still be there. The tax that every taxpayer pays in the district is still going to be there. Today, that budget is $2.7 million plus another item, 1.4, that's coming from who knows where. But I think we need to look at that and come up with a good monitoring program to continue that. Make sure that we follow through and that we reach the goals of that lawsuit, number one. Secondly, I believe the substitute teachers have been given the short end of the stick at TUSD. You know, during the pandemic, when we were all struggling in the schools, we were closing some schools. Teachers were not in the classroom in many cases. Who do we rely on to keep those classes going? If it hadn't been for substitute teachers, we would have closed those classrooms down. And I think we owe it to them to treat them fairly, to value them. It's not just about certified teachers here. We're talking about a segment of our teaching community that has been treated like second-class citizens, in my opinion. And I think we need to pay some attention to that. And we need to make sure that if they want to organize, we ought to be supportive of that. You know, there's nothing wrong with having multiple organizations to be recognized in the school system. Having said that, I just want to thank my colleagues for being so cordial and so civil, and for teaching me in these conversations some of the things that I might have missed along the way on certain issues. And I want to wish them all well. I'm glad and pleased that we have some good candidates running to fill those 2 seats. And I would be happy to serve with any one of them. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. All right, so we will we'll wrap it up here. Again, I want to thank you all for taking the time to talk to us. I know it's the end of the day and we went for an hour, so I really appreciate you taking the time, and I think the voters are definitely going to really appreciate hearing what you have to say. So with that, I will bid you adieu. And
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
you're very welcome. All right, have a pleasant evening, everybody.